Most developers hate wasting their time by typing the same thing over and over again. Well, did you know you can actually create a bunch of custom snippets? Of course, you can do things like quickly type it out like React, Arrow functional components, but you can also do way more advanced and personalized things. For instance, I have a blog, and on that blog, I have a schema that enforces certain categories that I can use in each of my markdown posts. Now, there's not a quick and easy way to do that, but with user snippets, I can actually enforce one of these things. Now, the way I do that is I come over here and just type CP blog, and then I invoke this here, and you can see what I'm going to get is a title. It's actually going to be dynamic based on this right here. It'll capitalize it and remove all those dashes with Regex. It will then add a public date, give me a space for the description, and then it'll give me drop downs for both of these categories. So if I hit tab or enter, now I can type in the description here, hit tab, and choose between all of those automatically, and then choose between false and true. And notice as well that it actually added the date for me automatically. It also added the name of it based on the actual file itself. Now, not only am I going to show you how to get started with kind of a basic version of this, but I'm going to give you access to a really important extension in VS Code that makes this a lot easier to work with. And then in the end, we're going to look at a bunch of use cases for more advanced topics like this one right here. So super customized stuff that only you would need, but that's the exact use case for user custom snippets. All right, let's jump in. All right, let's go ahead and create your very first user snippet, and we'll learn kind of the basic syntax when we do it. If you come over here to the settings and choose user snippets, if this is your very first time, I'll give you this little pop-up here. And there are a couple things to note, but generally I would just use a new global snippets file. This will apply these snippets to any folder you're working in your entire computer. You can limit it, however, if you want to, so you can do it by the current project. So that would be if you have a snippet that's very particular to one project, and I'll give you an example of that in a second here, or you could limit it by the language itself. And actually the extension I'm going to show you in a second will auto-select it based on the file itself. But you can actually limit the scope in this global snippets file as well. So I'm just going to start here, and that's what I'll recommend for you too. Let's give this a name, and I'll just call this default. And it gives you kind of a basic walkthrough of these. But what I'm going to do is just comment out this bottom section and talk you through this myself. So if you do this, you can see that we've got a few things. Here is the name of the snippet defined in this kind of JSON-like format. And you can see here that I've got a scope, so it's only going to run in JavaScript and TypeScript files. That's why generally, unless you've got like hundreds of these things, I would just leave it in one big default file, and then the 5 or 10 or however many you create will be here, and you can start to break them out as you feel need. Now the prefix would be what you type. So let's change this to something like a CL or something like that for console log. And then we've got a couple other things we'll look at here, but generally the body is what's going to be printed out in your file, and the description will pop up in the IntelliSense. So I'm going to go and come over this way, and let me find a TS file right over here. And I'll just jump up top here and type CL, and you'll see here that I get a readout of what this does right here, along with that description, and then the brief name right over here, print to console, and CL would be the actual thing. Now I can hit enter, and that will do it. I can also hit tab, but that only works if you've gone in here to your settings and you've set up at the very top here, editor tab completion on. So you may want to add that if you want to make sure that it tabs out. But if I just type CL and then hit tab, now I can start typing whatever I want, and we're set to go. Now, you may remember that there was some kind of gobbledygook right here. What is this stuff? Well, anytime you have a $sign followed by a number greater than 0, these are tab stops along the way. So this would be my very first tab stop that I could replace with whatever text I want. If I hit tab again, it will jump me out to here. So let me show you how that works. If I come back over here and hit CL and hit enter or tab, then my first one is right up here. I can start to type. If I hit tab one more time, it will actually drop me in right after this in that tab stop number 2 right here. Now you may occasionally see a tab 0 as well, and a tab 0 will actually be the very last tab no matter how many of these you have. So you can have like 1 to 100 or whatever, but then the final tab will be tab 0. So I'll save it and show you that. So if I come over here once again, hit CL, tab, start typing, hit tab one more time, it now drops me in right here. And that $sign and whatever the number is, 0 always being the very kind of catch-all last one, it will just go right through them. Now you can actually have multiples of them being the exact same thing. So both of these are the same tab stops, meaning if I save it and come over here and start typing, it will actually replace both of those sections because they're the same exact tab stop. So tab stops, that's kind of the first thing to note about this syntax. Now, sometimes you might want a default value. So for instance, I might say, hey, generally speaking, I want this to be a log, but I might want to change it. So let me grab all this, and what I'm going to do is replace it with a number 2. So this would technically just be my second tab stop. Now, however, I want to define a default value, and I can do that with a colon and then just the word log. So this will be my default,
but it will allow me to replace it with a tab if I want to. Now, there's one other thing to note is whenever you do this kind of default value thing, you do need to wrap all of this in curly brackets. Now, not the $, but everything else right here. So if I save this and jump back over this way and now do console log and then hit tab, I can now type whatever I want here. When I hit another tab, it selects that log and I can change this to something like warn or info or whatever else I want. All right, so that's how to do these default values. So these are the tab stops, and this is how to do a default value. Now, before we get going too much further, I want to show you an extension that makes some of this easier to work with, because as you can see, this is still kind of a little complex to work with, and it looks slightly nasty, but if you know those basic things, it's pretty easy to get started with replacing stuff. But I don't want to have to remember how to type all this out each and every time. So what I can do instead is if I come over here, and let's just find something where I might want to use it frequently. So I'm going to close this down, and the way I've got this project set up is I've got markdown files, and they have to have certain kind of templates at the start. So if I open this up over here, you can see that what I need is I need to have a title that's a string, a pub date that's a certain date, I need to have a description, and then I need to have a category and a draft set to either true or false. So these are my options that I have, and let's say I want to turn this into a snippet so that every time I write a new blog post, I can just quickly kind of parse through these. Well, what I can do is select all of this, and as long as I have an extension installed here called Easy Snippet, and it's this one right here with this ES right here, and it's got 92,000 downloads at this time. What I can do is select all of this and then just hit Command-Shift-P and search for Snippet. And what I want to do is create snippet from selection by Easy Snippet. So if I click this, it will just ask me for a name. So I could say like, I don't know, CP blog, something like that, and hit enter. And now it will create this much easier to read syntax. Let me close this down over here. Like this. Okay. And what it will do is create this much easier to read syntax for me. So it looks very much like the actual file I'm working in. You can see here I got this prefix. That would be the thing I type. I've got a description. If I want to add that after here, I could say something like my blog post template or whatever. So this would be for the front matter in Astro. You don't need to know what this is. Just know that I'm basically trying to create this right here. So when I save that, you'll see that it actually opens up this little sidebar that shows me all of my snippets that have been saved. Now it's auto-detected that I want this in Markdown, and I can alter this if I want to, and I'll show you that in a second. But for now, I know that this is a Markdown snippet, that this is what it looks like. However, I can just replace all of those things. So for instance, maybe I take this title right here, and I say I want this to be my very first tab stop. This date, maybe I want this to be my second tab stop. This description, I might want to be my third tab stop. And then I've got category and draft. So for now, I'm just going to leave those alone. Let me open up that one file one more time right here. Let's say I want to replace all this with my custom snippet. Well, now I can just type the shortcut, which is CP blog. And if you don't see it come up right away, you can hit Control and Spacebar. That should show it to you. And you can see that that's what it's showing me. And I've got all those tab stops already written in. So I could add my title right here. I could add my date right here, description right here, and tab down to the end of it. So a lot easier to work with it with the syntax. You just start with the selection of something you want and then replace it with all the values I've shown you. So that's kind of the basics of getting started with snippets. And if that's all you do, that will be more than enough to get started and a lot of really useful things. However, there's more you can do. So now let's move on to some more advanced features in snippets. First of all, this category right here, I may say, hey, you know what? I want this to be dynamic. If I go all the way back here, this is kind of what I've got right here. But what you may not know is that I've got just a few options I want to choose from the category. Because I'm going to be displaying these, I want them to always be spelled the exact same way. I don't want a capital or lowercase. I want it to always be the exact same kind of syntax. So I can actually enforce that with snippets. Now, in Astro, there's also a cool way to do this. It actually uses a validation library to check those. So I've actually got a schema for my blog right here that references these categories. So everything has to be one of these options right here. And it actually passes it in as an enum and a bunch of other stuff. But what you need to know is that I can only use these 5 categories. So how do I enforce this with a snippet? So let's close this down. I'm going to come back over here and open this up. And whether you're using this snippet file or you're in the user snippets file right over here, either way, it's the same syntax. So let me show you how that works. So I've shown you already that you can have a default value. So I could say like coding would be my default. And if I come over here and redo this right here, so I say CP blog, I can enforce that. And you can see how if I tab down here, coding is my default, but I could replace it if I want to. Already shown you that. Now let's come back over here. The other thing I can do is if I say, hey, I want multiple different values, I can just surround all of these with these pipe characters. So like this, inside here, comma separated, I can just add whatever ones I want. So tech or whatever, and I've actually got those copied on my clipboard, so let me just replace those, and then I'll hit Command-Shift-L once I've grabbed one of those to delete all those as other options. So now I'm basically saying I want it to be coding, macOS, design, tech, or automation. And you see how I've got capitalization here. I'm not going to remember those every single time I go to create a new file. Now I do need to make sure that these are all on the same line like this. And it's going to choose coding as the default kind of starting point, but then I can choose between these in a drop-down list. And you can see how helpful this is. I don't have to remember which categories I have available to me in my schema. I just basically select it from a list. Now, finally, before I save this, I do need to make sure I erase this colon, because if I don't do that, then it's going to just provide all of this as the default value. This isn't a default value, it's a list. So I'm going to save it like this. So same basic syntax, I just put it in pipe characters, and I do not have a colon for a default value. So now if I come back over here, I can come in here and say cp blog, and invoke this, and now I can start tabbing through these. But when I get to the coding and I hit tab, now I get a drop-down list that I can arrow through to select between those different options. And it will only let me select one of those, and then it just immediately jumps to the next tab stop. So pretty cool, right? All right, so let's do the same thing now. In fact, maybe you want to pause it and try to do the same thing here with this true or false value. All right, well, hopefully you had a good go of that. I'm going to come over here and say 5, and then I'll do these pipe characters. And I've got 2 I can set it to. I can set it to false, or I can set it to true. And I want false to kind of be the default in that list, but also be able to tab to true if I want. So back over this way, select all this again, cp blog, and I enter this in. I can tab through these, select any one of these here, and now I get a true or false. It's set to false by default, so if I just hit enter, it should move me on to the next tab stop. So really helpful when you're trying to basically enforce some kind of schema, and you want to use snippets to do it. Not hard at all, especially with this Easy Snippets extension. Now, one thing to note that this Easy Snippets extension actually gathers all of your extensions, or all of your snippets. So if I come over here to user snippets, you'll see now I've got a markdown.json file as well. And what's in here? Well, it's what's over here just in the normal VS Code syntax. So a little bit harder to read, a little bit harder to work with, but the exact same thing is what I've got right here. So I prefer to work in this syntax just because it looks a little cleaner, but in the end, it's actually saving it to a specific markdown language file over here for these, for the normal VS Code snippets. Now let's actually create a new file, and I'm going to come over here to my sidebar and open this back up. And let's say I come underneath my components and I create something like, I don't know, app.jsx. Okay, so I've got this over here, and I want to create a snippet that's kind of a reusable snippet for any kind of React component. So the first thing I could do is just start by typing out whatever I want that to look like. Now there are some extensions that will do this for you, but again, you get a lot of customization when you know how to kind of template this out yourself. So let's say I want this to be something like const app, and then we could take in props if we needed to, but for now I'll just say return, and this will return a div, and maybe I say app inside of here, and then at the bottom I might say export default app, like that. All right, so pretty basic syntax when it comes to a React component. Well, let's go ahead and create this as a snippet instead. So I'm going to grab all of this, hit Command-Shift-P, and search for Easy Snippet right here, create snippet from selection. So let me call this RAFC for React Arrow Function Component Export. So it's an arrow function in React that exports. And I'll hit enter, and now it opens this up right here. And you'll notice it looks the exact same as if I was just writing JavaScript, even though it's technically this snippet right over here. In fact, if I save it, you see it creates it right over here and automatically detects that it's in JavaScript React. Now this is fine and good, but right now it's just going to paste this exact thing in here. I want it to be a little bit more dynamic than that. So we could do a couple things. First of all, I could come in here and replace all of these. In fact, let me just do Command-Shift-L to grab all those. I could say all of these are going to be of the first kind of tab stop, so they'll all be the same thing. And I'm going to give them the default value of app, like that. So now let me come over here, RFCE. I tab that in, and it works just fine, even though the syntax looks a little funky over here since I'm getting all these errors, but it actually does work. It's just because it looks like it's JavaScript, even though it's not. So it's just one of these snippet files. So that's fine, but what if I automatically named it based on whatever the file name was? Now, VS Code gives you access to a bunch of different variables, essentially, that you can use in components. So if I jump over here, and I'll add a link to this in the description to snippets in Visual Studio Code, you can see we've gone over lots of this, like the basic snippet syntax for tab stops and placeholders and different choices you want to choose. Now, here are some variables that you have access to. So for like the selected text, or the current line, or the current word, or the current index. Now, what we're interested in is this one right here, this TM file base name. So if I just grab the file name, that will get me like app.jsx. What I just want is app itself. So I can actually grab this right here, and if I just add a $sign to it like this, then it will actually input that directly. So let me jump back over here, and all I have to do now is I can either do it like this and grab all those and add it directly like that, or I can just get rid of these curly brackets and not make it the default, just make it what it adds it in automatically. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So let's get rid of all this right here, and this right here, this right here, this right here, and this right here. So with all those set, if I come back over here, and let's maybe rename this file just so you kind of actually see the difference. So I'll name this something like, I don't know, bacon.jsx. All right, come over here, REFCE, and I can add that in, and now it's bacon, bacon, bacon. So it just added those automatically, and here's my final tab stop. Now there's more to be used than just the file name base. So if I come back over here, the other thing you may have noticed down here is we've actually got access to things like the date and time and year. You can also get things like a UUID, or you can actually add a comment block and start to add a line comment. So if it's something you do frequently, but may need some explanation for somebody else on your team, that's one way you could do that. So let's kind of take a lot of these things and apply it to that original example in the Markdown snippet. So rather than just having a placeholder here, we can actually add the file name itself like that. If I want to do the pub date itself, I could come over here and let's say I want to grab the current year, like this, and then I want to grab the current month, and then the current name or the current day or something like that. So let me come back over this way, and I'll add the current year, and then a dash outside of these, and then inside here we'll do current month, and then a dash outside of these, and current date. And then finally, let's actually add a time to this, and this will be relative based on where I'm at in the world. So I can add it like this, and I'm 7 hours behind, so I'll go ahead and add that. And now what I can do is actually come in here and add this to 1 and 2 and 3 since I don't have those earlier ones anymore. Now let me open back up this Markdown file itself, and we'll come in here and do cp blog and then insert this. Now notice what I've got is the actual name of the file put in here. I've got the actual date and time, so my date and then 0-100 hours basically based on my time zone. Now we can actually get even a little bit fancier right here. So right now you're seeing that I'm getting this kind of dashed time zone, but you can actually do some regex directly in here if you want. So let me come back over here and open this back up. Now, how would we do regex on this right here? Well, in order to do it, first of all, I'm going to add this inside of brackets. Then I'll do a / and a / and G so that everything will be replaced inside of this. Now, if you're not familiar with regex, I'm not going to try to explain all of it here. I would just encourage you to kind of Google around or Stack Overflow it or use ChatGPT or whatever you want to try to get an understanding of how this would work. Now inside here we can do two things. First of all, I can have a group that I'm actually searching for within the file name string. In this case, I want to just search for all of those dashes. Then I'll do another / and find a replacement value for those. So I'm going to name this number 1. So the first replacement value here is just going to be an empty string. So what I'm doing is saying find all these and replace them all with empty strings. So if I save this and I jump over to my shortcut for macOS Save Dialog, which is that Markdown file, I could just replace this with cp blog, and now you'll see it's removed all these dashes that are in the file name by default. Now let me jump back over this way because we can actually do one more thing, and that is we can grab, after we've taken out these dashes, we can actually grab the actual words themselves and then capitalize those words. So what I'm going to do is do a pipe character, and then inside here we're going to do one more regex where we search for any words like this. All right, so what I'm saying is give me all the words now that these have been taken out. And then as the second thing I'm going to replace, we've already replaced the first group right here with spaces. Now we're going to replace the second group here, and the default value here is going to be a formatted string. If I come over here, VS Code gives me access to format any strings just like this. So I can grab capitalize or camel case or Pascal case or whatever I want. In this case, I need this / just to denote that it's actually capitalized like this, and then I'll go ahead and just save it like this. So what it's going to do is take all these dashes and replace them with spaces. Then it's going to look at the second group, which are all the words, and it's going to capitalize those words. So let me come back over here and grab this and say cp blog, and now it should replace them all and capitalize them as well. So you can see how powerful this is. Now I've got the date automatically showing up. I've got the title showing up based on the file name itself. If I were to redo this, you can see that we've got those other things we've got set. So cp blog, and I pop this in. I can add a description, hit tab, choose between these, choose between false and true, and we're off to the races. So really nice to be able to work with things like custom schemas. Now, one other thing I want to show you is if I jump back over to my custom snippets, so configure them, and I'll go to the default code snippets right here, you'll notice that these do not show over here. If I were to create extra ones of the JavaScript or the Markdown, however they would show, maybe I should show you that. So let me go back to configure user snippets. If I came down here to Markdown and I created a second one right here, so if I copy this down and we name this something like cp post, and we'll do cp post right here, and maybe we just change this to say like hi or whatever. All right, so now we've got two different versions of these, And you may have noticed as soon as I saved it, I actually saw the second one show up over here. So all the kind of language specific ones show up in these easy snippets. Your global files do not. Now, there might be a way to configure that. I don't know what it is if they are, but I'll come back over here to my default code snippets just to show you one more example of something you may want to do. So you may want to say, hey, I want to grab this. And if I come back over here, you may remember that there was something that we could actually select, like the current selected text. So you might want to console log something like that. So what I could do is say, hey, my default value here, I guess it would be right here. I want this to be my selected text. Now, if I open up a TypeScript file, since that's what it's supposed to be in, that's what it's scoped to, I can come over here and do console log, and that works just fine. However, there's nothing in here because I had nothing selected. If instead, though, I grab this right here and then do console log, you'll notice if I hit enter, it'll actually print that out directly there, but it's kind of hacky, and until I actually hit tab, it just erases the words I had, but then it does put them back right there, all right? So this wouldn't be super useful in this use case, but you can see how you might want to console log something directly in line there. Well, what we can do is set these up with a custom keyboard shortcut. So I'll hit Command-Shift-P, and I want to search for keyboard shortcuts. And what I want is not the default one, but the keyboard shortcuts JSON file right here. So if I click on this, right now it'll be empty, but you can define key bindings if you want. So you can click down here and then give it a key. So the thing you want to type. So in this case, let's say for console log, I don't want to type CL. Maybe I just want to do Option Command and C or something like that. So if I then hit enter, it will add this in as Alt Command C or Option Command C, depending on if you're on Mac or on Windows. And then you see here that I've got a command name and then when it would be invoked. In this case, it's just the editor when it's in focus. You can also do things for like the built-in terminal if you want, but mostly it'll be this editor text focus. And then I want to replace this command with the actual snippet itself. So if I come back over to this Visual Studio Code documentation, you can see that what I want to do is type in editor action insert snippet for that command. So I'll do that right there. If I jump back over this way, then when that's all the same, but the args is what I want to pass in next, and this would be the actual console log itself. Now, you can do this in two ways. You can actually define your snippet file directly in here. That would be for very simple things like a console log, as you can see, or probably more what you would do is come over here and actually add it as an argument. Now, this lang ID is another way of scoping it, but the name is actually the name of the extension or the snippet itself. So if I come back over here, we're going to add a comma and then add the args directly in here. So for now, I'm going to comment this part out. And then inside here, what I want to do is name this the same exact thing as whatever my file would be. So if I jump back over here, open up my user snippets again and go my default, what did I name this thing? I named it print to console. So that's what I want. If I jump back over this way, that's what I want to replace it with. So now if I come over here, I hit Command, Option, and C, it just automatically console logs that. Now, again, I can actually limit it by language ID if I want to. So I could say like JavaScript or whatever, and then it would only work in JavaScript files or whatever, but I'm not going to do that in this case because I would want it to work everywhere. So you can actually invoke these things with just a keyboard shortcut and not with a whole typed out phrase if you want to. Now, I'll go ahead and add a link to both of the major ones I showed you today. That would be that arrow function for the React component and also the kind of custom one for my blog in case you want to play around with those more. I'll also leave a link to that document for the VS Code explanation because there's a lot more there we didn't get a chance to cover. But I hope this was at least a help in both the kind of the beginning stages and the more advanced stages of creating your own custom snippets. Of course, if you have questions or things that I could have explained more clearly, please leave comments below and I'd be happy to answer those or interact with you. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Happy coding.